Hey, this is Nina, in with you in the Five Pack. And today I want to talk to you about a really great work of intellectual history, and that is The Liberal Defense of Murder by Richard Seymour. Before we get to this book, I'd like to share with you two personal stories that relate to the book. One is a family member of mine once showed me a work by an author. It's like, I think you would like this, and because he really kind of speaks your language. I'm like, okay, what's the work you're looking at? And he shows me it's something by Richard Hitchens, and I just say, get that out of my face. I want to read that asshole. This is what Christopher Hitchens is. Because Christopher Hitchens, he speaks left, but ultimately he's an apologist for empire. So, and you can see this if you watch, there was a debate several years ago with George Galloway, a radical socialist from Great Britain, and Christopher Hitchens dealing with these apologists for empire. And that's online, and you should really watch it if you get a chance. And Richard Seymour is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party from Great Britain, which is a Cliffite Trotskyist party. And he runs the blog Lenin's Tomb, which you really should take a look at if you have a chance. And this work is a look at the useful idiots of empire, the useful idiots on the left who support empire. And it's really a sweeping narrative because he looks at these pro-war left people, the loose coalition of liberals, former radicals, and ex-socialists who rallied not just to American imperialism in its time of need, but to British or French imperialism. For instance, liberals, these people embrace empire as a progressive cause. They condemn the abuses that are committed by other people's empires, whether it's the Soviet Union or Germany or whomever, but they extol the virtues of their own. So when Great Britain was in India, they're extolling British respect for women's rights, even though at the same time the British were causing immense famines, which between 1876 and 1900 killed roughly 1 million people a year. And you can see more detail in this, not just in the book, but in Michael Davis's Late Victorian Holocaust. And they're willing to, supposedly, these Western values of democracy, human rights, and feminism or proto-feminism, depending on the situation, they justify empire. They say empire is a progressive cause when the British are in India or in Ireland or Tanzania or wherever they are, that they're doing something progressive. They're developing. They're bringing, a higher form of civilization. It's also very Eurocentric and racist because supposedly the colonized are not, capable of doing it themselves. And a lot of these so-called Western values, you can say, can be actually rather universalized. But that's beside the point. And he looks at liberals like Alexis de Tocqueville, John Locke, who, for instance, he may be considered a founder of democratic thought, but he also formulated principles that justify the British Empire. And it's not just in Britain and France where these so-called liberals and leftists are supporting it. They're also doing it in the United States. During World War I, we have a wonderful contrast between Eugene Debs, a principled socialist who goes to jail for opposing the war, but we have pro-war socialists like John Sprague, I believe his name is, and they are supporting the imperialist war because supposedly the United States is more progressive. And Seymour shows us how this happens again and again, not just with the British Empire, not just with France, but with the United States, and how every single time you see these pro-war leftists, again in quotation marks, or liberals, going over to empire. You saw it during Korea. You saw former Trotskyists going over and supporting the empire. Sidney Hook, a kind of semi-Trotskyist in the 30s. By 1980s, he's saying, I support U.S. policy in El Salvador. Okay, you see Paul Berman, a supposed left-wing 68er, supporting the Contras in Nicaragua. Unless you think that somehow Trotskyists are some kind of proto-neocons, you also have the new philosophers in France who were Maoists at one point or another. And they're going over and supporting human rights and willing to ignore the crimes of British, French, or American imperialism with the supposed humanitarian crises in the third world that justify the intervention of Western powers that often cause more death than they're supposedly going to prevent. They accept empire at its word. They accept that empire is some progressive, noble force when that's clearly not the case. And Seymour shows how this continually happens. And he shows how, in defense of empire, these supposed liberal or leftist thinkers are willing to go to quite extremes. Christopher Hitchens is saying that atheists can torture just as well as Christians in defense of empire. He defends the Iraq invasion. And we see this again and again. And this book, it's just a wonderful example of intellectual history, and it really just gets your blood boiling. And the problem is, as it probably needs to be updated now with Libya, because I'm certain that there are now leftists who are coming out rallying in support of empire, saying we need to intervene because it's the situation, because people are dying and we need to act now. Seymour is cutting through that. He's cutting through their justifications, their racism, because they really have nothing but contempt for colonized peoples, and showing how these are just the useful idiots of empire. And he also does something that he gets through this idea that neoconservatives are actually Trotskyists, because in making the transition from Trotskyist to neoconservative, which admittedly happened, they kind of ditched the whole Marxism and the communism thing, and I would argue the same thing happened with the new philosophers in France. They pretty much ditched it, and they came out with some pseudo-racist apologeta for empire. And he does deal with the views of Marx and Engels on empire, perhaps a little too shortly, but it's still there. I recommend this book. I originally bought it, and I was going to read it over a week. 6 hours later, I was done. So I recommend you to check it out and to check out Richard Seymour's blog at Lenin's Tomb. This is Ina. Until next time.